Welcome back to the deep dive. So, you sent us something interesting, and we're going to take a look.
Right. You know how you sometimes land on a YouTube channel and wow, the community is just so enthusiastic, like super intense.
Oh, absolutely. You see it all the time.
Yeah, everyone just showering the creator with praise. There are all these inside jokes. It feels like a real club.
A real sense of belonging.
But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Like, could that loyalty, that real desire to be in the inner circle, could it sometimes go a bit too far?
That's a really important question.
Hmm.
Could it start to look like, well, like the dynamics you see in cults, maybe? Or
Wow.
even controlling relationships?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive into today. We're looking at this through the lens of Rick Ross, who's a major expert on cults and coercive influence.
Right. We've been looking at his discussions where he compares these things, cult recruitment, narcissistic relationships, and yeah, that kind of intense online following for certain creators.
Yeah.
His book, Cults Inside Out, and just his decades of intervention work.
Hmm.
It gives us a really solid framework.
Okay, so the goal here for this deep dive is to really try and understand how these very supportive online spaces, how they could potentially shift. What are the mechanisms that might build an echo chamber around a creator?
And are there actually, risks of cult-like tactics being used maybe subtly in these digital communities?
Yeah. So let's start with a key comparison Ross makes. He talks about cult recruitment and relationships with narcissists. What's the connection he draws?
Well, what's really striking is how he points out the speed, how fast it can happen, and this intense flattery right at the start, the love bombing.
Love bombing, right. That flood of positive attention.
Exactly. It's like this overwhelming, seemingly unconditional affection, and he suggests it can sort of bypass our usual critical filters, makes people more open to influence down the line.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. It makes you think about those YouTube comment sections, right? Where a new person joins and suddenly it's like, welcome, so glad you're here. Lots of positive reinforcement.
And the creator often highlights that positivity too, encourages it.
So Ross connects that initial rush to how cults and narcissistic individuals pull people in. Okay. Then he talks about isolation. That seems key in cults.
It is. Traditionally, that meant physical separation.
Right.
Moving to a compound, cutting off family.
But how does that work with a YouTuber? They can't exactly make their fans move to a remote cabin.
No, not physically. But Ross talks about it as immersion in a controlled online environment. He actually calls it a kind of cult-like fan club.
Ah, okay. So the isolation isn't physical distance,
It's more about being saturated, digitally speaking, with just one viewpoint, the creator's viewpoint, heavily curated. Less about being away from people, more about being away from different ideas.
Got it. So the online community, the channel, becomes the primary source of info, validation, everything related to that creator and their world. Interesting. Okay, let's zoom in on the creator themselves, the YouTuber at the center. What does Ross say about the typical traits of these kinds of leaders?
Well, based on his work, Ross argues that a lot of cult leaders show traits consistent with malignant narcissism or even sociopathy.
Wow, okay. Strong terms. What does that look like in practice?
Key things are like an inability to ever be wrong, a really strong rejection of any criticism, sometimes even, rage if their authority gets questioned.
That definitely makes you pause and think about how some online figures handle feedback. You do see creators sometimes who seem completely unable to admit fault, or who, lash out if someone disagrees.
Ross emphasizes this difficulty with taking criticism constructively. And then he brings up this concept of flying monkeys.
Flying monkeys, like from Oz.
Sort of, yeah. It's a term used in narcissism dynamics.
Yeah.
It refers to the followers, the enablers, who basically do the leader's dirty work. They're the ones who attack the critics.
Oh, right, the super fans in the comments section. You see that constantly. Someone offers even mild criticism, and suddenly a whole bunch of devoted fans pile on, often getting really personal, just fiercely defending the YouTuber.
That's exactly the dynamic Ross is pointing to. The leader doesn't always have to get their own hands dirty, so to speak. The loyal followers police the space for them. It insulates the leader.
Okay, so that's one way control is maintained. What other tactics might discourage people from thinking critically inside these online bubbles?
Ross talks about how cults often keep members incredibly busy. Just constant activity, meetings, tasks. It leaves very little mental space for, quiet reflection or independent thought.
And you can kind of see a parallel with YouTube, maybe. The constant stream of videos, the live streams, community tabs, Discord chats.
Exactly. It can feel like a full-time job just keeping up. And if you're constantly consuming, constantly engaging, when do you step back and actually think critically about it all?
Good point.
And Ross also mentioned something called thought-terminating cliches. These are like little slogans or jargon that just shut down dissent. He gives the example of the Moonies using stinking thinking to dismiss any doubt someone might have.
Yeah. Like mental stop signs.
Precisely. And online, you see versions of this, right? Like, oh, you're just a hater, or you clearly just don't get it. These phrases can instantly invalidate any kind of questioning or disagreement.
Yeah, they shut the conversation down fast.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget the algorithms on these platforms, YouTube, social media, they're designed to show you more of what you already engage with.
Creating an echo chamber, basically.
Right. It reinforces your existing views and makes it harder to even encounter different perspectives. Ross talks about this with online radicalization, but the principle applies here too. Plus, he notes how cults and narcissists often badmouth outside sources of information. Don't listen to them, they're negative, or they're just jealous.
Creates that us versus them feeling. Okay. Another thing Ross discusses is the bait and switch. How could that play out with an online creator?
So the idea is simple, really. In cults, in these relationships, there's an initial appeal, right? The bait. It could be community, fun, self-help, whatever draws you in.
The thing that looks attractive at first?
Exactly. But the switch comes later. The reality of the group, the demands, the control. It turns out to be very different from that initial promise.
So a YouTuber might start out seeming really relatable. Maybe their content is just lighthearted fun.
Right. But as their influence grows, maybe their behavior shifts. Maybe the demands on the community become more intense, more controlling. Things could gradually become more extreme, but you're already invested.
So the community you joined isn't necessarily the community it becomes. And Ross also talks about creating fear around leaving. How does that work online? It's not like there are physical walls.
No, but the walls can be social, psychological. Think about the intense pressure to conform within a really tight-knit fan group, the fear of being kicked out maybe, or just ostracized, losing that sense of belonging, missing the inside jokes, being cut off from the community events.
Yeah, the social cost.
Exactly. That fear of social isolation, of losing your place in the group, can be a really powerful trap. Even without any physical gates, it just feels too costly to leave, or even to disagree openly.
That feeling of being stuck. Wow. Now, Ross really emphasizes how digital tools have, like, revolutionized things for cults. How does that connect to YouTubers building their communities?
Oh, massively. He points out how easy online recruitment is now, how private groups on Facebook or Discord can be used to maintain control and disseminate ideology, how platforms like YouTube itself are perfect for indoctrination.
And we see YouTubers using all those tools, don't we? Private servers, members-only content, constant engagement across multiple platforms.
All the time. These tools are designed for connection, yes, but they can absolutely be used to create these very insulated, controlled environments.
So the tools themselves are neutral, but it's how they're used.
Precisely. And like we said, they can keep followers really active, really immersed, which, again, limits the time and space for that critical thinking, that outside perspective.
It's kind of sobering, isn't it? The very platforms we enjoy can potentially facilitate this kind of control. Okay, so Ross, drawing on Margaret Singer's work, distinguishes between genuine education and thought reform. This feels like a really key distinction.
It's absolutely crucial. Singer's framework, as Ross explains it, basically says education involves open dialogue, you're encouraged to ask questions, sources are transparent, there's accountability.
Okay, sounds healthy.
Right. Thought reform, on the other hand, relies heavily on deception. Critique isn't allowed, maybe even punished. There's pressure to conform, to submit. And the key is that deception, Ron stresses, nobody knowingly signs up to be brainwashed or join a destructive cult.
They think they're joining something positive.
Exactly. Ross uses the example of Scientology's Purification Rundown. It's presented as this beneficial health program, right? But it's rooted in a very specific, dogmatic, pseudoscientific belief system. The vital difference is, are you allowed, even encouraged, to question and think for yourself? Or are you just expected to accept and obey?
That contrast is stark. Okay. Ross also talks about looking at the leader's history, their patterns. How would we apply that to a YouTuber?
Well, Ross always advises researching the history of a group or its leader. So for an online figure, it means trying to look past just the curated image they present now. How have they handled criticism in the past? Are there documented patterns of, say, manipulation or treating people poorly or maybe inconsistencies in their story?
So looking for patterns over time, not just the current snapshot.
Exactly. It can be very revealing about their character and methods.
He also makes a point about family and friends often being the first to notice something's wrong.
Yes, that's a really important flag. He says that people outside the immediate group, those who knew the person before they got involved, are often the first to spot worrying changes in behavior or attitude. If your family, your close friends are expressing concern about how intensely involved you are with an online figure or community,
It's worth listening to.
definitely worth taking seriously, not dismissing it out of hand. That outside perspective can be vital, even if it feels critical at the time.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up, isn't it? But those voices can be a needed reality check. Okay, finally, what does Ross say are the ultimate motivations behind these cult leaders, these abusers? What's driving it?
Fundamentally, Ross argues, it comes down to power and control. And often, tied into that, is some form of exploitation, financial gain, emotional supply, labor, sex, just the sheer narcissistic need for constant adoration and obedience.
So, when looking at a YouTuber and their community, maybe a critical question is, who's really benefiting most here? Is the dynamic primarily serving the creator's needs for power, control, admiration, maybe even money, in ways that go beyond a normal creator-audience relationship?
That's precisely the kind of critical lens we need to apply, yes.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really explored some potentially uncomfortable parallels today, looking at cult-like tactics, dynamics in narcissistic relationships, and how echoes of these might appear in online communities around certain YouTubers.
Yeah, we've touched on that rapid love bombing start, the creation of these digital echo chambers through immersion and maybe algorithms, the role of the leader figure, and those flying monkey defenders.
Right, and the ways critical thinking can be discouraged, that potential bait and switch where things change over time, and how digital tools can really amplify influence and control.
And throughout, we've tried to stress how vital it is to maintain your critical thinking, to intentionally seek out different perspectives, and just be aware that manipulation can be subtle, even in online spaces that feel really positive and supportive initially.
Remembering that difference between genuine education or community and potentially deceptive thought reform seems key.
Absolutely.
It definitely leaves you with something to think about regarding our own online lives. In this age where online personalities can have such immense influence, how do we stay engaged participants without maybe unknowingly drifting into an echo chamber?
It's a question worth reflecting on, for sure. Maybe taking stock of the dynamics in the online communities you're part of.
Yeah, good advice.
And if anyone wants to dig deeper into Rick Ross's work, his websites are culteducation.com and abusivecontrollingrelationships.com. They have a ton of resources. He's also on Twitter at Rick Allen Ross, and the Cult Education Institute is on Facebook and YouTube too.
Great resources. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Definitely some important things to consider.
Thanks for joining us today. See you next time.